Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Hook Turn podcast with my very good friend Sanbib Ahmed. How are you today, Sanbib?
I'm doing very well. I'm genuinely keen to talk about every car that we're talking about today. All of them are affordable, relatively speaking. None of them are like supercars or something. In fact, all of them are meant to be mainstream cars. Two are electric, one hybrid. So again, a bit of a variety, and yeah, keen to discuss.
Yeah, we have a variety of different cars, and not just in the same segment, but these are sort of three cars competing in completely different segments to each other. So, the vehicles that we'll be talking about today are the ID Polo GTI. So, we talked about the normal Volkswagen Polo a few episodes back, but we've also had a reveal of the GTI performance version. So, we'll chat a little bit on that. Secondly, the Honda Prelude. So we have Australian pricing and specifications. And lastly, we'll talk about the Subaru Uncharted, which is doesn't have anything to do with the famous video game, but is actually Subaru's smallest electric SUV in the Australian market. So let's get started with the ID Polo GTI. So this is the performance version of the Polo ID Polo, which is Volkswagen's now smallest electric car, I believe. And ID Polo GTI just sort of ramps up the performance a little bit. So we're now getting 166 kilowatts of power and 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 6.8 seconds, front wheel drive. So that's alongside its same as its stable and same as its other as the other ID Polo models. And unlike the rear wheel drive ID3 Neo and the other ID series models on the older MEV platform. And we still have like a pretty decent range, Sanviv. I think it's, what is it? I believe it's around
424 kilometers.
424 kilometers on the WLTP cycle and 105 kilowatt DC fast charging and a 52 kilowatt NMC battery pack. So those, I think, especially given its size, like it is a light car, one size smaller than the Golf, and so on. I think those are still very reasonable figures. Samir, do you have any thoughts on the design and the performance?
I think the design is pretty good. I think the design will really show itself, like a lot of Volkswagen's current range, probably look especially good at night, especially with the light bar sort of design they've got going on with
Mm,
all their newer models. I find this an interesting car because a lot of electric sports cars, yes, this isn't a performance car in any stretch, and they're not trying to sell it as one. I imagine Golf GTI, ID Golf GTI will be significantly more powerful. But it's interesting that even as a sports car or more or less a regular performance car, that they're not really trying to go, oh, okay, this car's really quick 0 to 100 because it's actually for an EV slow for a EV. 6.8 seconds, that's something that 0 to 100, like most Chinese SUVs can do that. That they're like SUVs in a straight line. But I think Volkswagen is realizing that 0 to 100 times for EVs are now meaningless because, as I said, you can get a Chinese SUV that now can do like nearly 3 seconds 0 to 100s, right?
yeah.
So now it's not about 0 to 100. I think now what Volkswagen and a lot of the buyers in this segment are not looking for 0 to 100. They're looking for, okay, how does this drive? And at least if you believe Volkswagen's engineers, it will be one of the best driving car that they've produced, which is saying something because the current Polo GTI, the petrol one that's currently sold, is already, at least for its driving, quite well regarded. So I think that basically what in Australia, I don't think this car will do very well. But I think in Europe, there will be a significant market for this car. Obviously, EVs have a lot more mainstream appeal in Europe, and the roads and stuff are very suited for cars like the Polo GTI. And also, relatively speaking, in Australia, European cars are quite expensive compared to Europe, whereas we get Chinese cars for very cheap compared to Europe.
Mm.
So Europe will probably get pretty good pricing for this, whereas the current Polo GTI is like still 40K or something, which you know it's quite expensive for what you're getting. And if the current GTI is for 40K, then imagine what this electric GTI will be 45, 50K. And at that price, as I said, yes, the buyers, no one's going to be cross-shopping this with the MG4 X Power, right? MG4 X Power is 1,000 times faster in a straight line. But in terms of actually enjoyment to drive, I doubt it would come even close, right?
Agreed.
So it'll be interesting to see. But in Europe, they don't have these Chinese options. So for them, a Polo GTI, this Polo ID Polo GTI will be quite good. The other thing, and we've spoken about this, Volkswagen are actually listening to feedback. They're returning to button controls while still keeping the touchscreen, but trying to be like, okay, things like climate control and stuff, putting it back into the button. So really, for a specific type of consumer in Europe, this car would be a perfect car. There, if it lives up to what Volkswagen promises, I suspect there will be very little to criticize. Technology-wise, it's still quite good. Large touchscreen, I imagine, will have all the safety tech, all the driving assistance tech, etc. So it's not like tech-wise it's going to be lacking, and driving-wise it'll be good. And its range isn't pretty good as well. 424, that's pretty good. So for a small car as well, that's more than enough for the kind of driving that anyone who's buying a car would do.
Yeah. I think like in Australia, if they decide to sell this specific model, I think the closest direct competitor is probably going to be the Mini Cooper electric, especially the S version, which is has sort of similar I think largely
Not the
similar.
MG4X Power.
No, I mean to your point, like this is like both the European. Yeah, I think the MG4 X Power is also probably going to be maybe cross-shopped, but I think to what you just said, Sambib, like both the Mini and the Volkswagen have more of a focus on handling rather than outright 0 to 100 km/h times. Like the MG4 is uh, like in a straight line, much faster than both of those, like both the Mini and the Volkswagen. But in terms of the driving enjoyment, both are known for their handling and their agility. So I think those are probably they're probably the like spiritually the two closest competitors in terms of the driving philosophy and the dynamics and so on. Um, I mean, it'd be interesting to see how this is priced. I just because of the physical controls, I would probably like look at this over the Mini. Although I will say that I have a personal attachment to the Mini as a previous owner of one. So and this is also slightly more practical option with the five-door variant and so on. So. I think in terms of the styling, they've done a good job of making it sporty without adding too many extra bits and bobs that sort of are going to corrupt the very clean design of the standard ID Polos. So they've kept the clean lines, not having too many creases or aggressive, like extremely aggressive front and rear bumper. Yes, it is a little bit more aggressive than the standard Polo, and they have like that like that faux diffuser at the rear as well, but it's not too much more overly aggressive compared to the standard option. So yeah, I like that. They have the iconic tartan seats, so that's all good. They have all the GTI hallmarks. So yeah, I think the pricing will be very interesting. Sam, do you have any thoughts on how, if they sell it in Australia, how much they might sell it for?
It would be late high 40s, low 50. So
Okay.
maybe if they want to be competitive, they'll try and slide it under 50K. So say
Yeah.
48, 49
Yep.
before on roads probably.
Yep.
And yeah, that would make sense because, like I said, they're trying to still flog the current Polo GTI, which is like I'm sure it drives well, but it's still very outdated as a car, even within Volkswagen's current range. So
Yeah.
this, yeah, will be significantly more.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'm really interested to hear because yes, the MG4, the even the not the urban but the model that's the rear wheel drive model, that the pricing of that has gone down quite a bit. And I did say that they're probably not going to be directly cross shop, but um it is definitely a factor to be considered
The
given
MG4 X Power is 47,990 drive away.
yeah,
So
that's a
if
larger
the
car as well.
MG4, it is crazy quick, 0 to 100 in 3.8. So that's like supercar quick, actually.
Yeah.
like would be an old supercar quick.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think it's a one segment up as well because that's sort of competing directly with the size-wise it's similar, more of a Corolla size and a Golf size
yeah,
than a
and this is the refresh model, so they updated the interior, all the tech
yeah,
and stuff. So this is
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So uh, I think the pricing will be very interesting for this Polo GTI if they sell it in Australia. So keen to see it on Australian roads. Anything else on this model, Sandvik?
No, I'm just it's like I said, it's good to see Volkswagen listening to feedback.
Yeah.
The interior now looks really good, very button heavy. The exterior looks pretty good. From the front, it looks great. From the rear, I'd have to see it in real life, but still looks pretty good in photos. And yeah, it's and like I said, in Europe, I'm sure it'll do quite well if it's priced. I think I saw the pricing will be in the low 30,000 euros,
Mm.
which seems reasonable. But the problem is in Australia, everything becomes a lot more expensive when it comes to Euro cars. We get great Chinese deals and great deals on Chinese cars, but not on Euro cars.
Yeah. Okay, look, let's move on to our second topic, which is Australian pricing and specifications for the Honda Prelude. So, just for context, many of our listeners who were sort of grew up in the early 2000s and the late 90s would be having, a lot of affection for the Prelude as like a sports car, and more of a almost like a sporty cruiser, and had a lot of innovations with four-wheel steering and the VTEC engine and so on. But the latest Honda Prelude, as we've discussed in an earlier episode, is now a hybrid and shares a lot with the Honda Civic. It is essentially like a coupe version of the Honda Civic, of the standard Honda Civic hybrid, but has some suspension and tuning. Suspension parts. Basically, the front suspension is lifted from the Civic Type R, but then tuned for a little bit more comfort. So that's essentially the latest Honda Prelude in a nutshell. But now we have Australian pricing and specifications. So the pricing is 65,000 drive away. So that's well above the Toyota GR86 and the Subaru BRZ and the Mazda MX-5, who I suppose are fellow Japanese sports cars. Although, quote unquote, this is more of a Grand Tourer GT car rather than an out and out, track machine, especially like the BRZ and the GR86. Sanvib, I know you mentioned in an earlier episode that you thought that this would be priced more around the 70 to 80 $1,000 mark. So are you pleasantly surprised with this pricing, or do you still think it's a lot more expensive than it should be?
I am pleasantly surprised, but now what I've realized looking at the specs, it's really kind of an MX-5 competitor-ish type. And MX-5 is in the 40s and 50s. So if you compare it to, yes, it's more luxurious, a bit more techy than the MX-5,
Has four
but
seats as well, technically.
yeah, it has 4 seats as well. But really, it's meant to be the kind of sports car that isn't really a sports car in the performance sense, but more just in the driving sense, just like the MX-5, right?
Mm,
The MX-5, they're like all the reviews are like, oh, MX-5 isn't powerful, but the way like the how fun it is to handle, etc. This feels like it's in the same kind of vein rather than being like, okay, here's like a turbocharged engine and it'll go 0 to 100 in like 5 seconds sort of thing, which is what some of its competitors might be banking on. To be fair, the GR86, the BRZ, even the Nissan Z are all similar. None of them are insanely quick. They're faster than this car, definitely, but not really that quick. So I feel like this, and this we did say in when we first discussed this in a much earlier episode, that this car almost certainly at this price point in this very niche market, the only people who are buying this first are people who actually remember the original Prelude. There's not a single person who's going to be buying this who has no attachment or memory of the original. They're going to be heavily leaning on nostalgia for this one. It's coming in very limited numbers. I think in Australia, I mean, it's coming in limited numbers, so it'll be a bit exclusive. You're not just going to see them everywhere on the road. So that will be a very appealing. I suspect, and if funnily enough, going by some of the comments on the articles I've seen, I suspect it will literally be appealing to people who are in their like 50s and 60s,
yeah,
either
boomers.
looking, yeah, yeah, exactly. People with money to burn who want like a cool car to drive around
Yeah,
in, don't
second
want to be
car.
overwhelmed by new tech, don't want to be overwhelmed by too much power.
Mm,
This is pretty much aimed squarely at those people.
yeah.
So in that sense, they've actually done a pretty good job. As I said, the exterior looks great, no question. The exterior looks great.
Mm.
Um,
I actually did see one on the road the other day, and it does like the proportions really work in person, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
absolutely. Yeah, it absolutely looks as cool as most sports cars do. Funnily enough, because it's got the Civic engine, it will be fuel efficient, which is not something you could say about most sports cars, so to speak.
Yeah.
It is would actually be kind of fuel efficient. So that's another funny thing. Otherwise, and it sounds like it'll be just an easy car to drive because the Type R is like obviously it's manual, and while the current one, if you can drive manual, will probably be an okay car to drive. This one really feels like you just get in, have a great time driving to wherever you want to go. Yes, it's not that, but I suspect it's one of those cars you'll just feel cool while sitting in it. Yeah, you're not might not be the fastest on the road. Everyone like, oh, what's that car? It looks really cool, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I mean, it does have that S plus shift system. So if you do want to pretend that, you want to be a race car driver, you can have the artificial noise and the simulated gear shifts and, all the fun that comes with that. And then when you want to have a more relaxed drive, you can just put it into the normal sports mode or the GT. I think there's a GT and a comfort mode as well, and just let the car take care of things without having too much stress. But yeah, I think I agree with you, Sam. If this is like most buyers will use this as a second car, they'll have like a family SUV or a much more practical car, and this is like a fun weekend car. You want to take it out for a spin on the Great Ocean Road, Blackspur Drive, some of the other around the Blue Bell's Line of Road in the Blue Mountains. Have a little bit of fun. This is sort of like the perfect car for that, and it's still comfortable to sit in. It's not excessively firm suspension wise and so on and so forth. So I think pricing wise, it's interesting because the GR86 and the MX-5, they all sort of top out at the 50-55 grand mark. And this is at least 10 grand more expensive than that at 65K. But if you spend another 15K, you can also get yourself into a BMW 2 Series coupe or a Nissan Z. So
Or actually, I just thought of another one. Oh, I guess it's a bit too expensive, but the Ford Mustang?
yeah, the Ford Mustang as well. Yes. So I mean, the Mustang is sort of like if has a lot of heritage, and if you want a Mustang, you'll it's the type of car that if you want a Mustang, you'll only buy a Mustang because you
Yep,
want like
yep,
that pony car, and you want the I mean, you can get it as a four-cylinder, but really you want like the V8 engine with a Mustang.
yep.
I think what's most interesting is actually the comparison with the 2 Series coupe, because even the 230i, it's 76, 77 grand before 100 costs. So if you add 100 costs, it will be maybe low 80s. And that is like, I mean, it's also like 0 to 100, not out and out incredible, but it will be more than definitely faster than the Prelude. It's more premium. It's an established premium brand, nicer interior, of course. Also four seats, more practical, I think, because it has less of like a sloping roofline at the rear, and it can actually take, like some like slightly smaller adults rather than children only in the back seat. So I think that's the real interesting factor. And I'm thinking like, if you're looking in the market and you're not too concerned about fuel consumption, like yes, the 2 Series, it's a two-cylinder turbo engine. So it won't be a huge fuel guzzler, but it won't be as efficient definitely as the Prelude. But if you can spend another 20 grand, which is not like entirely unreasonable at this price point. Like it is maybe if you can spend sort of 30% more, which maybe some people might be willing to do, you could get yourself into a BMW coupe, which is, as long as you're okay with the styling, is probably like a better car in almost every respect. So I think that's the dilemma for me. Like if Honda is still like they're trying to position themselves upmarket, but it's still like quote unquote a mainstream brand. If you can spend a little bit more, you can get yourself into a proper premium brand with all of the iconic, BMW 2 Series coupe, heritage, all of the performance, all of the technology as well. So that's where it's really interesting, and it'll be interesting if any of these motoring publications do like a back-to-back comparison between the 230i and the Prelude, just to see, how especially in terms of how they drive, how the handling compares, because that's a rear-wheel drive sports car, and this is still front-wheel drive and based on the Civic chassis and powertrain. So, Sandeep, did you have any other thoughts or any thoughts on that comparison with the 2 Series or the Nissan Z or any of the more sort of models that are priced above the Prelude?
As I said, I'm glad that they've made it.
Yeah,
I think that it's going to be a car that, yeah, does quite well for them in a sense. And yeah, I'm glad that they didn't try and like be like do what they've done with some of the other cars, which is price themselves out. Like they actually have tried to be like, okay, we want to have this car be relatively successful, and they haven't just been like, okay, we're going to price ourselves out of the market and not even like try basically. I'm glad they haven't basically done that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's good for the consumer. Just more choice, so more options to pick from, and there's a bit of a concern that there are less and less coupes and sports cars available for under $100,000, especially in the Australian market. So it's good that, this is another entrant into this segment. Okay, cool. I think we might move on to a final topic, which is the Subaru Uncharted, which is Subaru's cheapest electric SUV in Australia. And it's interesting what's happening with Subaru because they're utilizing their, shared collaboration and partnership with Toyota to a great extent. Subaru, I don't think on its own has a huge amount of EV expertise, so they're relying on what is essentially joint products with Toyota. So they have initially we had the Solterra that came out, I believe, in what, 2023, I think, or 2022 maybe. Um, alongside the BZ4X. Um, now we also have the Trail Seeker, which is one size up from the Solterra, and now we have the what we're going to talk about in this episode is the Uncharted, which is one size below the Solterra. So this is sort of like a smaller SUV, maybe size wise, it's comparable to, I'd say, the Honda ZR-V, Nissan Qashqai, Toyota Corolla Cross, although those are sort of all hybrid options. This is a fully battery electric vehicle. Um, when I saw the pricing, Sanviv, it's 59,900 before on-road costs. But it's only offered in one spec, and that's like a fully loaded spec. With the only options are really a panoramic sunroof and two-tone paint. So Sandra, we're getting 522 kilometers of range on the WLTP cycle, which I think is pretty good. 252 kilowatts of power, all-wheel drive, dual motor, which is very powerful actually. Like that's pretty I think, do you know what is the 0 to 100 time? I think it's
5 seconds.
5 seconds, which is very fast. I think that's probably the quickest Subaru we've seen in quite a while. I think
Yeah,
it's
they
even
actually said it's as fast, if not faster, than a lot of their WRXs, even though the WRX is seen as the performance model.
Yeah, exactly. It's faster than from 0 to 100 than, the older WRX STIs even. So, Sandra, what are your initial thoughts on the pricing? Do you think it's good value for money, especially compared to the Chinese competition?
Look, I don't think it's good value for money compared to the Chinese competition, but I do think it's good value for money for a Subaru because honestly, they were starting to, again, like a lot of their competitors, begin to price themselves out. So I
Mm.
think that at least this car is significantly smaller than, most of the Chinese competitors. So in reality, it's competing with SUVs like the BYD Atto 3, that sort of size SUVs, which are starting in the
Okay.
40s.
Yeah, I
But
thought it was
this
a bit larger, but yeah, maybe.
it's
Yeah,
not as large as a full mid-size SUV though.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So but first it's a Subaru, so the brand loyalty, it's all-wheel drive, which
Mm.
is another huge thing that it's got. I mean, so the Chinese also have all-wheel drive SUVs, but when you hear of Subaru and all-wheel drive, you really trust the all-wheel drive. It also, you know how we were speaking about how the Suzuki e-Vitara,
Yeah,
even if they'd made an electric Jimny that cost that much, it would have made more sense. This car, it's not an electric Jimny, but at least it has some off-road credibility, right? It's got a
yeah,
fair bit of the off-road tech you'll find in Subaru's
yeah.
other models.
That's the
And so
X
you,
mode.
yeah, exactly. So you probably
50%
can't
more.
go
Yeah.
like incredibly rough terrain, but it can handle reasonable off-roading, I'm sure, quite
Mm.
well. So it's got that unique selling point, which is great. Under $60,000 means that in that price range, it's not pricing itself out. It is still relatively competitive.
Mm.
The one thing that I will say, I don't like the rear look. I think it doesn't look very good. I think it looks quite awkward, especially from the rear. I
Yeah.
think the rear looks very awkward. Like the front looks fine, but the rear, it's not.
I think you have to see this one in person again. Like I mean, I personally don't mind it. I like they have a little bit of a lip spoiler, but it is like a very bluff tail. Like they've sort of cut it off, and it's an interesting design, definitely. I think it is fully loaded. Like it has all the features you could possibly need for that for what you're paying. It has, all the adaptive headlights, all the safety technology, adaptive cruise control, even it has vehicle to load support, power seats, heated seats, memory seats, uh, all of the, premium audio as well, wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Fast charging is it's not amazing, but it's not behind the curve. It's pretty average, 150 kilowatt DC fast charging. I think like I think it's definitely much better value for money than the Crosstrek, which is a model that I remember, I touching on in a previous episode. I went to Tasmania for a bit of a holiday for a week, and the car that I had was the Crosstrek, and that's sort of like a almost like philosophically like the combustion engine version of this car. Like it's similar size. Maybe the Crosstrek is a little bit smaller than the Uncharted, but um, sort of same, essentially the same segment. And that is not that much cheaper for what I think is like much worse vehicle in terms of the powertrain. Like much slower, much more gutless powertrain, and you're still paying like I think even the top spec Crosstrek is still what 45 grand, and this one yes you are paying 15K more, but I think it's a much superior car as well. Sanjeev, did you have any final thoughts on this model?
Yeah, I'm glad that Subaru is offering it. That's the first thing. It's funny because for a while we were like, what will these Japanese brands do? And it's clear that with their partnership with Toyota, Subaru are actually, and they're offering SUVs,
Mm,
electric SUVs, which is what people are actually buying. So, yeah, this car has the best chance of doing well for them. It's still not going to touch any of the major Chinese competitors, but it's got the best chance out of all of the electric SUVs to do well because, as you said, the pricing is competitive. It's from a trustworthy brand. It's all-wheel drive. You can semi-go off-road, etc., etc. So, you're pretty good in that sense. And yeah, I think it'll do reasonably well. Obviously, people are still buying lots and lots of EVs. Maybe full the full craze has died down a bit, but still plenty of people are buying them.
mm.
Certainly not something that people have stopped buying. So yeah, we'll see how it goes.
I think it's definitely worth looking at this car in comparison to the Kia EV3, especially like they're similar size. The Kia EV3 it's also like it is a good price, and it has, I think, in its top spec a little bit more range than this as well. But um, it's definitely worth cross shopping between the two just to see what you prefer. This also has a lot of physical controls, a little bit more of a conservative interior design, I think the ad advanced driver assistance systems might be tuned a little bit better in the Subaru than they are in the Kia as well. So it's definitely worth comparing those two models against each other. Okay, look, I think we might leave it there for this week's episode of the Hook Turn podcast. But thank you for listening to us. Please remember to like and subscribe, give us a review, leave us a rating. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, all of the major podcasting platforms. And we'll catch you next week. Thanks so much.
See you
Bye.
later.